Welcome again to Tucker Carlson Tonight. I'm Ed Henry, in for Tucker. You're looking at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, because we're waiting a possible appearance from President-elect Donald Trump that could come later this hour. Earlier, he commented on the economy, as well as his anger at the United Nations over that anti-Israeli resolution. Will the president-elect weigh in more directly on Israel? We'll find out and take you there live as soon as we get more definitive word. In the meantime, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not mincing any words, declaring Israelis, quote, do not need to be lectured by President Obama and his cabinet. And now the war of words is growing a little more personal tonight. Netanyahu just posted this to Facebook, a photo of then Senator Obama wearing a yarmulke and praying at the Western Wall when it helped him politically. The Netanyahu post reading, quote, 2008, presidential candidate Barack Obama at the Western Wall. 2016, UN calls the Western Wall occupied Palestinian territory. Seriously? The post concludes. That post came just after searing remarks from the Prime Minister, blasting a long speech today by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
Now I must express my deep disappointment with the speech today of John Kerry. A speech that was almost as unbalanced as the anti-Israel resolution passed at the UN last week. Palestinian rejection of Israel and support for terror are what the nations of the world should focus on if they truly want to advance peace. And I can only express my regret and say that it's a shame that Secretary Kerry does not see this simple truth.
Nations was about preserving the two-state solution. That's what we were standing up for. Israel's future is a Jewish and democratic state, living side by side in peace and security with its neighbors. There are a similar number of Jews and Palestinians living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. They have a choice. They can choose to live together in one state, or they can separate into two states. But here is a fundamental reality. If the choice is one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic. It cannot be both. And it won't ever really be at peace.
Here now live, a key newsmaker, Ambassador Danny Danon, Israel's diplomat at the United Nations. Welcome. We appreciate you coming in during such a busy time. I want to start with that very specific claim by Secretary Kerry. He said if the choice is just one state, Israel can either be Jewish or democratic, not both. What does that mean to you?
It's not true. It's not correct. Israel is a Jewish democracy. Today we have more than 1.7 Arab Israelis who are not Jewish, who live in a very strong democracy. So we do not accept that. What we saw now, it was a failed attempt to defend the indefensible. You cannot protect the decision that was made by the administration last Friday when the US actually allowed a one-sided resolution to pass at the UN. So for more than an hour, Secretary Kerry tried to justify what happened at the UN Security Council. I was there in that room. That was a shameful moment because the US is the closest ally of Israel. We work together, we share the same values. And to see the US voting with Venezuela and other countries that they're all against Israel, it was very disappointing.
Well, they didn't vote with them, they abstained, but by extension,
by abstain, actually, what you said is correct, because usually the US stand with Israel and applying the veto power. It happened in 2011. It happened in 2014. Without the veto, the US blocked the resolution. And now, when the US abstained, all the rest voted to support the resolution, and it passed. And when you read the resolution, it's so one-sided, saying that we have no legitimate right to the Wailing Wall, to the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem.
Yes.
This is insulting.
Are you planning for the possibility of President Obama potentially pushing more anti-Israeli UN resolutions before he leaves office in 3 weeks?
We hope it will not happen, but after last Friday, who knows? Because at the Security Council, people were used to the fact that the US is standing with Israel. Now there's a new environment at the Security Council. Maybe some of the countries will come with new resolutions against Israel, and we don't know what will happen.
Okay, we've talked about the Obama side. Let's talk about the Israeli government. Can you say unequivocally tonight that Prime Minister Netanyahu is still in favor of a two-state solution?
He said it himself. He's willing to negotiate.
But does he mean it? Is it real?
When Prime Minister Netanyahu says something, he means it. And he said that he's willing to negotiate everything with President Abbas. He's willing to go to Ramallah, to come to New York, to negotiate. But after the resolution passed at the Security Council, the Palestinians have no reason to come back to the negotiating table, because for them, it's much easier to get whatever they want in the Security Council without negotiating, without condemning terrorism, without stopping the violence. It will be very hard to move forward, and we welcome President-elect Trump's words that he is committed to Israel, and he will continue to work to support Israel.
You mentioned President-elect Trump. You have put out a statement saying that you appreciate his unequivocal support. You've said that in recent days. You say it again now. In the Republican platform this summer in Cleveland, then candidate Trump and his aides pulled out language supporting a two-state solution. Since you say you're for a two-state solution, would you condemn that action by Donald Trump?
First of all, it's a bipartisan issue. 88 senators asked the president to apply the veto power before the vote on Friday, and he ignored it. So it's not Democratic or Republican.
Well, but hold on one second. He's going to be the president of the United States, and in the Republican Party platform, it no longer says that they want a two-state solution. That's counter to what you just said.
Prime Minister Netanyahu will come to meet President-elect Trump. They will discuss all the issues, the Iran agreement, the peace process. They will speak about everything. But it's not so simple. When Secretary Kerry speaks for more than an hour about the settlements, what about the Hamas? What about radical Islam? What about terrorism in the Middle East? You saw that he focused only the issue of the settlement. The settlement are not the real obstacle to peace.
I hear this criticism of President Obama that the Obama doctrine has become basically be tougher on your friends like Israel than enemies like Iran and Assad in Syria. Do you agree with that criticism?
Well, many ambassadors approached me and asked me what happened. What happened to the relationship between Israel and the U.S.? And we know that the timing is crucial because it is a transition period, and within a few weeks there will be a new administration in the White House. But the relationship between Israel and the U.S. will continue to be strong. It's based on shared values, and I'm optimistic about it.
What about how personal this has gotten? I mentioned that Facebook post from the Prime Minister a couple of moments ago, where he's showing Barack Obama as a candidate at the Western Wall and sticking it to him. Let's put it bluntly, and saying that when he basically needed that politically to say he's praying at the Western Wall, it's just the opposite of what happened Friday. It seems like this has gone much further this time, and this has gotten personal.
We are disappointed. We did not expect it from our closest ally. I'm used to read those kind of resolutions coming from Venezuela, Yemen, Syria. You know, for them to bash Israel, it's a national sport. But when the U.S. teamed with those countries, and the U.S. was a major player behind this resolution, we were very offended about it.
So, Mr. Ambassador, you're intimately involved in all of this. Give our viewers some hope about the future then. We know your criticism of what's happened today and what happened last Friday. What is the way forward for peace?
Well, we hope that the new administration will make sure that you achieve peace through direct negotiations. We did it in the past, Ed. We negotiated with Egypt, with Jordan. It was hard, but we achieved a real peace. And they will tell the Palestinians and to the rest of the world, you cannot impose peace treaty on Israel by passing resolutions of the Security Council. You should call both sides to engage and to have real negotiations.
When you look at President-elect Trump nominating a hardline ambassador to Israel, and Prime Minister Netanyahu appearing to dig in with his comments today, last question, how can you get peace when it looks like the hardliners are digging in their heels even
When
deeper?
Prime Minister Menachem Begin was elected in 1977, he was considered to be a hardliner. And people say, what will happen in Israel tomorrow? And look what happened. He was the first leader to achieve peace. But you need a partner. We found Sadat in Egypt as a real partner. Today, we don't have a viable partner among the Palestinians. That's why they keep coming to the UN instead of coming to talk with us.
Ambassador Danan, we appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much.
Happy
Ed.
New Year to
Thank you. Happy New Year.
President Obama is also taking some heat from senior Democrats over his relationship with Israel. House Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer released a scathing statement last night demanding Secretary Kerry not even give that speech today. The statement read in part, quote, I urge Secretary Kerry and the administration not to set forth a formula which will inevitably disadvantage Israel in any negotiation. Though we'd like to get beyond all of these statements from official Washington tonight and give you an inside glimpse of what the Israeli people are actually thinking about all of this turmoil. Who better to do that than our ace foreign correspondent, John Huddy, live for us tonight in our Jerusalem bureau. Good evening.
Yeah, hey, Ed, good evening to you. You know, like Friday's resolution, UN resolution vote, people here in Jerusalem are disappointed, they're dismayed, but they're not exactly shocked about what was said tonight in Secretary Kerry's speech, based on just the history, the relationship between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Secretary of State Kerry, and specifically President Obama. Some people can understand some of the points, others not so much. And along with Prime Minister Netanyahu, not to get too detailed about the politics, but other Israeli leaders are also firing back at Secretary of State Kerry. One Israeli official told me that while the Middle East burns, Secretary of State Kerry talks about home construction, and another senior Israeli official said that he questions if the Obama administration truly understands what is happening on the ground here. Well, President Obama and, as you heard, Secretary of State Kerry they both said, yes, we do understand what's going on. And Secretary of State Kerry also said tonight that this is a personal thing for him. But as far as if they understand what's happening, that's really been the sentiment that's been expressed to me on the street. You know, people that I know, friends, neighbors, and all of this really has been on people's minds, absolutely. At the coffee shops, a place called Aroma here in Jerusalem. That's a kind of a social scene. A lot of people hang out there. At the restaurants along one of the main drags, Emek Rafaim, a busy shopping area also here in Jerusalem. And of course in the settlements, where really the focus, all this focus really has been at this point. That said, Palestinian leaders are also sounding off tonight about the speech and the future of peace talks. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas said that Palestinian leadership is ready to resume talks if Israel is willing to freeze all settlement activities, including those in East Jerusalem. The Palestinians also say that they want negotiations to be based on Friday's UN resolution, and that alone may be a non-starter for Israeli leadership. And really, tonight's speech and the overall Israeli backlash from officials, the word on the street, people talking about it on the street, is, I guess you could say, the climax of several days of fierce political battles, fiery political rhetoric after Friday's UN resolution vote. And there certainly was no love lost between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Secretary of State Kerry. And I'm sure people will be talking about this tomorrow as well. As one official said to me earlier tonight, boy, what a night, huh, John? Ed, back to you.
To say the least. And thank you, John Huddy, for cutting through all that rhetoric. We appreciate you staying up now well past 2 a.m. in Jerusalem to give us that live report. If I don't get to talk to you before the weekend, Happy New Year, buddy.
You too, Ed. Thank you.
Just a short time ago, down at Mar-a-Lago, President-elect Trump made a statement on jobs and the economy. He took a couple of brief questions from the media, though it is a long time since he held a full-blown news conference. Let's go to Peter Ducey, who's live in Palm Beach, Florida, tracking the President-elect's transition to power. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Ed. All day long, the transition team had been teasing an announcement they said would be positive for American workers. And about 2 hours ago, we found out what it was when the president-elect came out and announced that one really big company is going to bring 5,000 jobs back to the United States, and one smaller company is going to create 3,000 here.
OneWeb, a new company, is going to be hiring 3,000 people, so that's very exciting. So we have a combination of Sprint for 5,000 jobs, and that's coming from all over the world, and they're coming back into the United States, which is a nice change. And also OneWeb.
The president-elect also said he thinks this was only possible because there's a spirit of hope in this country. And even though transition officials insisted today, the president-elect knows there's only one president at a time, which some White House officials have been trying to remind him of. He's making a lot of big news with regard to the economy, because this follows the Boeing and Lockheed Martin negotiations, also at Mar-a-Lago, that seemed to have yielded promises of on-budget Air Force One and F-35 projects. And it also follows the big carrier announcement and the announcement with that Japanese bank CEO to create 50,000 jobs in the States. Today, we also learned that even though the president-elect and the current president have been hypercritical of each other in the press lately, with President Obama saying he would have beaten Mr. Trump in 2016 if that was legal or possible, and Mr. Trump saying that there's no hope anymore in this country and that the president is disrespecting Israel, the two are apparently still talking on the phone a lot. Transition officials told us this morning they've been in regular contact, and they will be for the next few weeks. And Mr. Trump said, when he talked to reporters, that he had a nice conversation with President Obama today. He wouldn't go into details. He said it was general in nature. We also saw something extremely rare in any situation covering a president-elect or a president today. As the press was all packed up and ready to leave Mar-a-Lago in a van to head off the property, the president-elect came back out to say that he wanted to talk some more about the VA. He then had an official with him explain the transition team is working on a public-private option for veterans that would let them get treated at the private facility of their choice. And that followed a meeting today here at Mar-a-Lago with executives from some of the nation's best hospitals, including Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic. And the executive who is here from the Cleveland Clinic, Dr. Toby Cosgrove, is, we are told, a leading contender to become the next VA secretary. So a lot going on here at Mar-a-Lago in between Christmas and New Year's. Ed?
So much going on, Peter. I'd wish you a Happy New Year, but I bet we'll be talking live at least a couple more times before the weekend. Good to see you, Peter.
Oh, yeah.
And now, it is time for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most powerful weather patterns. President-elect Donald Trump is in the eye of tonight's storm over this tweet, which reads, the U.S. Consumer Confidence Index for December surged nearly 4 points to 113.7, the highest level in more than 15 years. Thanks, Donald. The president-elect's self-congratulatory ending to that tweet did not go unnoticed. From mocking to the downright ridiculous, hashtag Thanks Donald quickly went viral. Michael Evans said, our tweeter-in-chief talks about himself in the third person like a pro wrestler, but with worse vocabulary and poor spelling. Scott Dworkin tweeted, I've researched Trump so much I speak fluent Russian now. Thanks, Donald. Joe Gasper said, there was toilet paper in the stall at the gym today. Thanks, Donald. Charles Elson tweeted, my brother's house in Florida hasn't fallen into a sinkhole yet. Thanks, Donald. But as always on Twitter, there were dissenting opinions, many using the hashtag to express genuine, albeit snarky gratitude, maybe toward President-elect Trump. Leah tweeted, thanks, Donald, for almost 2 months of hysterical liberal meltdowns. It's been glorious indeed. Brony Drumming said, thanks, Donald, for giving me the tears of every social justice warrior on the planet for me to drink. It was delicious. See you on the 20th, presumably January 20th. And finally, Chuck tweeted, thanks, Donald, for showing the world that the mistakes of the last 8 years can be undone in 100 days. Don't set expectations that high. That's tonight's Twitter storm. For a while, it looked from the outside like the president and president-elect were, against all odds, getting along splendidly. But is the relationship now on the rocks? That's next. Also, how will the Trump White House work with Israel after that UN resolution? Ambassador John Bolton is here. He says it's time to scrap the two-state solution, replace it with a three-state solution. We'll have details coming up.
This is
That brief honeymoon between President Obama and President-elect Trump appears to be over. The two appear to be having a bit of a bromance early in the transition process, but earlier today, Mr. Trump appeared to borrow a line from T. Swift and declare they are never, ever getting back together, tweeting, quote, doing my best to disregard the many inflammatory President O statements and roadblocks, though it was thought it was going to be a smooth transition. Not. Actually, that last part appeared to be quoting Borat with the not. Here now to decipher what went wrong in this bromance, Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, and columnist Lauren Chevet. Good to see you both. Lauren, what went wrong?
Well, first of all, calling it a bromance from the beginning is,
it's probably a stretch.
Little stretch. I mean, they're cordial, polite to each other. I mean, I think, look, fundamentally, when you're president of the United States, you can disagree with him on any number of issues, but fundamentally Barack Obama respects the office of the presidency, respects the peaceful transition of power, and has offered repeatedly to help the president-elect in his transition, and I think he's tried to do that. Unfortunately, the president-elect also takes any statement that is not in his favor as a personal affront, hence the not, very presidential of him, by the way. It's unfortunate that he's calling, the president is president until January 20th. Mm-hmm. He has every right to continue to underline his own policy positions and his perspective on the election.
In fact, let's go back to November 10th and hear how they described it all at the beginning.
My number one priority in the coming 2 months is to try to facilitate a transition that ensures our president-elect is successful. Because if you succeed, then the country succeeds.
This was a meeting that was going to last for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and we were just going to get to know each other. We had never met each other.
Just getting to know each other. The reason why I called it a bromance is that Donald Trump had questioned whether he had even been born in this country, and then was falling all over himself to say, he's being really nice to me. So, Caitlin, what's happened here with, for example, the anti-Israeli resolution, that really sets things up poorly for Donald Trump.
Right. I think this is certainly a reaction to that. It's a reaction to President Obama saying that he would have won the election. And so given that backdrop, also given the backdrop of Donald Trump is preparing to take office as the most unpopular incoming president. And so he's really, I agree with Lauren, he is on the defensive on a variety of different things, trying to kind of confirm his stance. The Russian hacking element of this, too, is important because he is seeing that as efforts to, or the focus on that as efforts to kind of delegitimize his presidency. So he's really fighting those tides. And I think these tweets are more representative of his defensive posture, not so much the relationship between himself and Obama, which they talked on the phone today. And
they ended up talking on the phone. So maybe there's a little bit of a thaw there. And Lauren, interesting because some of the other tweets from Donald Trump today were specifically about Israel. Quote, "We cannot continue to let Israel be treated with such total disdain and disrespect. They used to have a great friend in the U.S., but not anymore. The beginning of the end was the horrible Iran deal, and now this, UN, exclamation point. Stay strong, Israel. January 20th is fast approaching." Talk about the stakes now for Donald Trump. This is a bigger foreign policy challenge, perhaps, than anyone anticipated immediately out of the gate on January 20th, number one. But number two, are expectations being set so high for this man as well that somehow he's going to fix this, in addition to draining the swamp and everything else he promised?
Well, he's setting those expectations for himself because he continues to insist that he alone can solve the ills of the world. And the reality is that every president since the founding of the State of Israel has struggled with the most complex and difficult geopolitical situation in the world. And I appreciate that the incoming president believes he's going to be the one to fix it. It's an extremely difficult time. Wherever you are on Israel, the issue with the settlements continues to be that it makes it more and more difficult to find agreement between the two sides. And so, in a climate, I appreciate that the president-elect is a, supporter of Israel. I think President Obama is too. They have different views on the future of the state and the peace process. But, to say that he is going to solve something automatically that, the last 48 years of presidents have been unable to solve is,
Democrats and Republicans,
setting himself up for a pretty impossible task.
Caitlin, weigh in on that if you want. But also, I want to note the flip side of the negative parts of coming into office with all of these problems is when the economy appears to be doing well, you get some credit, too.
Right, exactly. And he's already starting to take credit for kind of the economic positive outlook, right, which is another reason why Obama is going to is weighing in and is going to probably continue to weigh in. I think what's interesting about the foreign policy challenge surrounding Israel is that Kerry's statements today, I think, kind of unite Republicans in a way around Donald Trump. That is not the case on other foreign policy issues, particularly when it comes to Russia. So I think Donald Trump can take away from this day something of a step forward in terms of the Republican Party, at least on Capitol Hill, being supportive of that element.
Especially perhaps when he's got Democrats like Steny Hoyer challenging the Obama White House and suggesting that maybe they're going to support Israel, whether it's a Republican or Democratic
exactly,
president.
And Chuck Schumer as well.
As the incoming Senate Democratic leader. We appreciate it. Lauren, as well as Caitlin, Happy New Year to you as well.
Happy New Year.
And there's two sides to every story. Secretary of State John Kerry says the Obama administration has been Israel's greatest friend. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, says not so much. Ambassador John Bolton is here next to give us some inside dope on what the real story is.
Has been Israel's greatest friend and supporter with an absolutely unwavering commitment to advancing Israel's security and protecting its legitimacy. No American administration has done more for Israel's security than Barack Obama's.
Secretary Kerry paid lip service to the unremitting campaign of terrorism that has been waged by the Palestinians against the Jewish state for nearly a century. What he did was to spend most of his speech blaming Israel for the lack of peace.
A war of words between Secretary of State John Kerry and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Prime Minister slamming Kerry in a late-night news conference declaring he's looking forward to the day that Donald Trump takes office. Here now is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Good evening, Ambassador Bolton. And I wonder what you think about the fact that Ambassador Danan from Israel just told us at the top of the show that he's preparing for the possibility that President Obama could come up with another anti-Israeli resolution in the days ahead, in these final 3 weeks.
Well, I think it's entirely possible, although Secretary Kerry and other administration spokesmen have said that they won't. Look, they were, to put it politely, economical with the truth about their involvement in the resolution that passed last Friday. So, I would take whatever they say with a couple of chunks of salt. I think that we have this so-called peace conference coming up in Paris on January the 15th. I would be worried about what might happen there, what might follow in the Security Council.
I read closely your op-ed in the Wall Street Journal a day or so ago where you said the two-state solution has been on life support for years, and you want to see a three-state solution. Can you briefly summarize for our viewers what is the way forward in your eyes?
Well, the briefest summary of what's wrong with the two-state solution is John Kerry's speech today, where he says, well, there's either a one-state solution, which is bad for Israel, or there's a two-state solution. What a failure of imagination. The answer here is to have in mind the life of the average Palestinian. What would be best for the average Palestinian and his family? The delusion of a two-state solution is never going to make life better. What I've called for is a three-state solution. Give the Gaza Strip back to Egypt. Give whatever part of the West Bank Israel's prepared to give up back to Jordan. Tie the Palestinian people into real economies. Give them a chance for their families to enjoy a better life. Don't make them the tip of the spear in the fight against Israel, as they have been for decades. Now, there are a lot of reasons why my suggestion is difficult to achieve. Fine, let's see other things. But beating your head into a wall, which is what the advocates of the two-state solution are doing, is not going to bring peace to Israel and the Palestinians.
Ambassador Bolton, I checked the numbers, and Abraham Lincoln, when he delivered the Gettysburg Address, it was just 3 minutes long. FDR's first inaugural, 20 minutes. Ronald Reagan tear down this wall, 26 minutes. John Kerry went on today for 1 hour and 13 minutes. At the end of that, what is the Obama doctrine in your eyes?
Well, it's still that the main problem in the entire Middle East is the Israeli-Palestinian dispute, and the main problem in that dispute is Israel building apartment buildings in East Jerusalem. I think it's a simple-minded view of life. I think this speech demonstrated that Secretary Kerry and Barack Obama, and I might say before them Hillary Clinton, were living in a parallel universe. I think this is an extraordinarily difficult problem, but beating your head on the same line without any recognition that it is not realistic, honestly, is driving the parties farther apart. And I think, remarkably, Chuck Schumer today, in response to the Kerry speech, said he feared it encouraged extremists on both sides. Nice work, John Kerry.
Ambassador, thank you for your insight tonight.
Thank you, Ed.
Some top Democrats are also joining the chorus of people criticizing the Obama administration over Israel, while others are rallying around the president by noting it is Prime Minister Netanyahu's push for settlements that is, in their eyes, the biggest threat to peace. Here now is Democratic strategist Julie Radzinski to get the other side. It's great to have you coming in here tonight.
Thanks so much.
First of all,
good to see you.
Good to see you. Let's start where Ambassador Bolton left off. I mean, can you acknowledge as a Democrat, here you have hundreds of thousands that have been slaughtered in Syria,
of course,
and, no answer there, not just for the Obama administration, but the world community. And yet the UN and the Obama administration are focused on, I believe it's the 20th resolution this year alone, beating up on Israel.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right. I'm shocked. This may be a first that actually I agree with a lot of what Ambassador Bolton said. I think his proposal is an interesting one. I think Egypt and Jordan would run as far as possible from getting the Gaza Strip and the West Bank back into their territories for all the reasons that they don't want anybody dealing with those two territories. But I will also say this. Look, at any relationship, and I said this earlier today, any relationship, whether it's a personal relationship or a foreign policy relationship between states, you cannot want it more than the two parties involved.
Right.
And right now, neither the Netanyahu government nor, more importantly, his coalition government, the Naftali Bennett's, the Israel Beitenu, these parties that are very pro-settler parties that have put Bibi Netanyahu in power as part of this coalition, want to stop the settlements and want peace with the Palestinians, nor do the Palestinians want peace with Israelis. And when you have Mahmoud Abbas saying one thing in English, which sounds fairly reasonable, and a very different story in Arabic to his own people, and naming streets after people that they call martyrs, that we call terrorists, it says to me, who is John Kerry at this point, this late in the game, to come out, or any of us, to come out and say to the two parties involved, this is what we would like you to do when neither of the two parties are interested?
Very interesting indeed. Now let's switch to domestic politics. I wanted to talk to you about this as well. Harry Reid, the outgoing Senate Democratic leader, had some comments about the bench for Democrats right now, looking ahead to 2020, and basically said that when you go through it, it appears we're going to have an old folks home. We've got Elizabeth Warren, she'll be 71. Biden will be 78. Bernie will be 79. What in the world is going on with the Democratic Party when you have even Harry Reid saying, we don't have a bench?
A failure of imagination, because I remember in 2000, I sat around, I was depressed. I was booking trips to Hawaii, thinking, this is
Are you doing that again after
you know,
what
I
happened?
actually booked a trip to Jamaica election night, and I went, and it was great. But I will say this, you know, nobody knew about a little state senator named Barack Obama in Illinois, who nobody thought about. And then in 2004, he came out of the Democratic Convention, gave a speech that electrified the country, and 4 years later was president. So somewhere out there, it doesn't have to be Elizabeth Warren, though it could be, or Bernie Sanders, or Cory Booker, who's just a few years older than I am, in his mid-40s. It could be somebody like a Cory Booker or an Elizabeth Warren, or it could be some little-known state senator, state rep from, I don't know, Oklahoma, Nebraska,
right.
somewhere that none of us know about.
Almost nobody saw Barack Obama coming, as you say. Almost nobody saw Trump coming as well. And frankly, the Republicans don't necessarily have that much of a bench either. But when you win, it covers up a lot of other problems, obviously. And so moving forward, he's the man coming to power.
The Republicans had a great bench. They had Marco Rubio, this young dynamic guy, Ted Cruz, this Latino from Texas.
On paper, they had a good bench.
On paper, Carly Fiorina, all these people, Chris Christie, all these young, vibrant, strong guys. Look who became president, the one that nobody expected, the one who's 70 years old, the one that was never part of any bench discussed 4 years ago or 8 years ago. Politics is a funny thing. Things turn on a dime. You never know who's going to be.
Last question. We were just talking about the Israeli and Palestinian peace process and the future of the Democratic Party. Let's fuse those together. Are you worried that Representative Keith Ellison, who's previously defended Louis Farrakhan and some hateful statements, could be the next chairman of the Democratic National Committee?
You know, if you're talking about this from a purely Democratic perspective, this is such a nuanced issue. It doesn't lend itself to sound bites. You could be pro-Israeli, as I am. My family lives there. My grandmother lived and died in what is considered a settlement, a part of East Jerusalem called Gilo. So I'm very familiar with this issue. You could be pro-Israeli, passionately so, and oppose settlements. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden you have to somehow say, if you're not in line with what Bibi Netanyahu's coalition government wants.
But what about defending Farrakhan? That's a whole other matter.
Defending Farrakhan's a different story. And listen, he's repudiated that. I take him at his word. I'm not overly comfortable with it, but nevertheless, he says he repudiates it. He repudiates it.
We'll see where it goes in the new year. Julie, appreciate you being here.
Thanks very much.
President Obama just asked Congress to more than double funding for immigrants and refugees. And one congressman warns this could lead to more terror attacks right here in our own backyard. He joins us live next. President Obama has demanded Congress more than double its spending on, get this, illegal immigrants. That's right. The Obama White House wants $3.9 billion for programs aimed at helping illegals as well as refugees. Republican Texas Congressman Brian Babin calls that program a Trojan horse. The Congressman joins us live from Houston. Good evening, Congressman. I wonder, what's your beef with the spending of the money, and we'll break it down.
My beef is that the top priority of us as American elected officials is to keep Americans safe. And we've seen over and over again the refugee program turning into a Trojan horse, not only in Western Europe, as we've seen, but also right here in America. And so when the president wants to double the funding for his Office of Refugee Resettlement, and spend more money bringing in more refugees towards the end of his career. He's going to be doing this up till the very last days, hours, and minutes of his president to make as much mischief, to try to keep President-elect Trump from undoing what this president has done in terms of endangering the safety of American citizens. And so President Trump will be at a disadvantage. He's trying to, he's also dismantled our national security entry-exit system to make it more difficult for Mr. Trump to undo these refugees that the president is trying to bring in. And so it's just trying to throw as many roadblocks in the way as he possibly can. So the president...
Yeah, let's dig deeper on that then. But in terms of the refugees,
you bet.
It's a Christmas season. I would assume that at least some of these refugees you're willing to spend some taxpayer money on, because you would acknowledge they're not likely terrorists. You want to sort out the good from the bad, obviously. And here on the Christmas season, you do want to help some of those people who are coming over legitimately as refugees.
Absolutely, Ed. We want to help those people in safe zones right where they are, near their homelands. We're a compassionate nation. America always has been. We don't want to bring them into the country. Well over 75% of Americans have spoken loud and clear. They do not. The polls show they do not want refugees coming into the United States from these terrorist hotbeds like Syria, Iraq, and Somalia, etc. And so we have a bill to try to stop this. I introduced this bill a year and a half ago. It has to get to the floor. Americans have spoke. They will not tolerate anything other than stopping this program so that we can keep safe and make sure that our children and our citizens are safe. That's our first priority, our highest priority.
Congressman, last question.
Officials.
President-elect Trump, as you mentioned, has talked about extreme vetting. What's the line there? What would your bill do so that we could separate the good from the bad?
My bill would pause the program until we could determine exactly what that extreme vetting would consist of. We've seen also recently that the president and his administration have absolutely classified the vetting procedures where we were told in classified briefings earlier that it would take up to 24 months to vet these people, and now we're seeing evidence that it may be as short as a few days. And so we want to make sure that these people coming into our country are safe, that we are not introducing a Trojan horse, and at taxpayer expense, literally setting terrorists up in business in the United States of America. And we want to, and this is exactly what we're going to be doing. And I'm urging President Trump to honor his promises, to undo what this president has done for 8 years, and that is endanger the national security of our country. And that's what my bill is all about.
We appreciate that. We mentioned the Christmas season in terms of helping the refugees, but also over the Christmas season, people very jumpy about terror right now and making sure the country is safe. We appreciate you weighing in on this tonight.
Absolutely, Ed. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Happy New Year to you and your family. Appreciate it. And you've seen Kennedy hosting her show on the Fox Business Network and co-hosting Outnumbered right here on the channel. But did you know her previous job put her in the middle of the musical world? Kennedy steps into the friend zone next.